Hello everyone, and a big welcome back to Fandom Vintage. My name is Lily and I am coming at you from my brand spanking new craft room studio space. So today I wanted to show y'all how I made this adorable Hobbit door brooch that has a working door which opens to show a very picturesque painting of the Shire. Now this project was actually unplanned. I was going through the craft store and just kind of rummaging through their clearance section where I saw that they had a little embroidery hoop miniature and it was on sale for 99 cents. So immediately was just inspired because I love a good deal. So with this embroidery hoop miniature, it came with an outer ring for the hoop and it also came with two circular discs. I assumed to put whatever embroidery design that you wanted into the hoop, but I decided to use the smaller of the circles to make the door to go inside of the hoop, and the larger circle would be the backing, which is what I would be using to mount the watercolor painting on so that the brooch can act kind of like a little locket to show a picture on the inside. Now the first thing was to make the door. I wanted to make it the green door, very much like Bilbo's door in Bag End. So I wanted to give it that look of having planks of wood that go vertically across the length of the door. So to do that, I took the wood, and this is made of like a balsa wood, so it's pretty soft. I took a mechanical pencil without any of the graphite or lead coming out, and it was just the metal tip of my pencil, and used that to make grooves into the wood to make those vertical lines and to make it look like it has those wood panels. And then after that, I used a brown paint just to paint the entirety of the door. I did want it to be green, but to give it kind of a distressed look and to where you could see some of the wood coming through from underneath the green paint, I wanted it to have a richer brown color underneath. So I covered the whole thing in brown paint and let that dry before putting on the green paint. I did use a dry brushing technique for the green paint just so I could achieve that kind of distressed look with the wood in the door. Now, once the door was completely painted and dried, I had these little golden studs that are supposed to look like nail heads for certain craft projects. So I just used those as the door knobs. So I pressed that into the door on both the front and the back side. Now for the hinges, I didn't have miniature hinges and I couldn't really be bothered to go out and buy a whole set of hinges just for a project I wanted to do on a whim. So after a little bit of brainstorming, I figured I could actually just use a little bit of twine to make these little faux hinges that could attach to the door and the door frame and allow the door to swing. So I attached the rope on with a little bit of E6000 because I am terrified of adhesives not working and things falling apart. So I use E6000 for quite a lot of things. Now next was to do the outer portion of the door. There are a lot of different variations. When you look at Hobbit doors, sometimes they have brick or stone or wood. I wanted to go with a gray stone look to go around the door. So to do that, I used an air dry clay, cut out a small strip and wrapped it around the hoop of the embroidery hoop. Once it was all the way around, I made little lines to replicate the separate stones that went around the doorway. After that, I used a coarse brush that I had that has been dried with all sorts of paint and really isn't useful for painting anymore, but it was great for texturing clay, so I just stippled it around the edges to give it that textured stone look before letting it dry. Now, once it was all dry, I coated the entire thing in black paint because I wanted the crevices and the cracks to look like they had been worn in, that they were dirty and old. So before putting on any gray, I covered the whole thing in black first, and just like the door, I dry brushed on gray paint afterwards to give it, again, that distressed look. I could have stopped there, but I did want to give it a little bit more of a rustic look. So I made a textured paint to replicate some moss that would be growing on the stone. And to make the textured paint, I used acrylic paint, some glue, and baking soda. So once it dries, it gives kind of a fuzzy texture and it looks very similar to moss, especially on a small scale. So I stippled that on in random places onto the stone and let that completely dry. Now for the inside. I wanted to have a picturesque little scene of the Shire, as if you're opening the door and walking through the Hobbit door into the Shire. And honestly, this was the most intimidating part because I am very, very new to watercolor painting, but I figured, screw it, let's try it anyway. How much harder could miniature watercolors be than regular size watercolors? So I got my Bob Ross on and painted my itty bitty teensy weensy painting. So it is nowhere near perfect, but I was very, very happy with how it turned out and kind of surprised myself that I would be able to paint on such a small scale. Now that the painting was completely dry, I cut it out and glued it onto the wooden backing, and I glued that onto the back of the doorway. So at this point, I finished the door according to how I originally had sketched it out and planned it. But there was something missing, so I just kind of improvised. I wanted a little bit of foliage or flowers on the front of the door just to give it a little bit of personality, make it a little bit more interesting. I used a brown polymer clay to make what were like little branches, curved them to the door to make sure that they would fit. I also made teeny tiny little flowers to go onto the branches as well. This was really tricky just because I have really clumsy fingers, and working in something at such a small scale was pretty difficult, but I figured it out eventually and finished with a handful of flowers. So after baking all of that up, I made another batch of textured paint in a different color and stippled that onto the little vine-like branches, glued everything in place with some E6000. Almost forgot to mention, I also glued on the pin backing, obviously, so I could wear it. Now everything is dry and we are completely done. Hang on tight, kids, because we're getting ready for some close-ups. That is it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed watching me make this Hobbit door brooch. I am very, very happy with how it turned out. It is super adorable. I guess I love making miniature versions of things as well as, I guess, giant versions of things. I think I just like things that are out of proportion. Anyways, thank you so much. Again, if you did enjoy watching this video, make sure to subscribe for more vintage, geeky, crafty goodness. Thanks so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you next time.